is this live hasn't started? Did you go live from your page or from the event?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Black. Conversations in Black is a space facilitated by Musings from the Lighthouse that brings together Black artists and cultural custodians who demonstrate a commitment to the liberation of Black bodies. My name is Carla Felicia Scaife, and I am the founder of Musings from the Lighthouse. As conversation partners, we enter into an agreement in this space. In this space, we are intentional about the way we communicate thoughts and ideas. We intend for our language to be as accessible as possible by not allowing the specialized jargon of our individual disciplines to hinder clear communication. In other words, we want everyone to be able to understand what the hell we're talking about. We demonstrate mutual respect for one another by being active listeners and offering thoughtful responses. We try our best to refrain from using ableist language, which includes words and ideas that are offensive to those living with physical or mental disabilities. We try our best to refrain from using language that isn't gender inclusive. For example, instead of saying all men are created equal, we might say all people are created equal. And we affirm the right of anyone who participates to only discuss what they feel safe in offering to the conversation. We realize that we don't always get it right, and so we are also committed to being accountable for the ways in which we impact one another. Here, we are committed to doing the least harm, and we care deeply about those who join in to listen. Last week, we talked about radical self-acceptance as a ritualized practice. In that conversation, we thought about what it might look like to engage in honest self-reflection as an intentional daily practice. We also imagine that work as an act of resistance against systems that thrive on our collective brokenness to persist. After that discussion, I was reading about ableist language in relation to common disability metaphors that stigmatize those living with disabilities. Brokenness was one of the metaphors that came up, and I realized that using brokenness in that way, in the way that I did, perpetuates a narrative that those living with disabilities are less valuable or need to be fixed in order to be whole people. Because we live in a society that is obsessed with wholeness, it's important to think critically about the ways we imagine wholeness as being. With that being said, I hold myself accountable for perpetuating a narrative that further stigmatizes and devalues those living with chronic illnesses and disabilities. I encourage each of us who engage in that conversation to continue challenging ourselves in that regard by stretching our imaginations in ways that honor the many different manifestations of humankind. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, this week, we're going to locate the revolution within the writer's pen, and we'll be thinking about how liberation calls for writers to engage in a kind of truth-telling that is often frightening and risky. Today, we have the Reverend Shantell Hinton here, who I'm super excited to have with us. Hi, Shantell. And we'll hear from her in just a few moments. But first, let us take this time to center ourselves. So if you would, take this time to be silent and take in a few deep breaths. As we continue breathing, let us remember our intentions, the worth of our bodies, and the power of our stories. Ashe. So Shantell, thank you for being here. I'm so excited. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me, Carla. As Carla has already said, my name is Shantell Hinton Hill. I am a wife, daughter, friend, preacher sometimes, although I have a little bit of a rebellious streak. But most of all, I'm a storyteller. I love to tell stories. And so I'm really excited to be here and share some of what I've been learning in this journey that is writing. And I'm happy that we're talking about Black women and all of our varied experiences.
Thank you for being here. Okay, let's get into it. We have 5 questions to engage. If you have any thoughts, further questions, or if you need clarification on something, please feel free to leave a comment. As we affirmed last week, your voice matters, and we welcome the sound of it in this space. Okay, our questions are as follows. When writing, how are you able to distinguish your voice apart from the noise of your inner world? Second question. When you have identified your voice as your own, what comes up upon that recognition? Is there a conflict that arises internally between what you feel comfortable saying and what is true? Okay. Third question. Is what is true always necessary to say or write publicly? How does one go about discerning if it's necessary to write or say publicly? Fourth question. What are the risks of disclosing that truth? And fifth question, what are the risks of not disclosing that truth? Okay, so we'll go back to the first question. I'll read that again. When writing, how are you able to distinguish your voice apart from the noise of your inner world?
This is an excellent question that I don't think there's an easy answer to. I think the noise that goes on in my inner world often matters. I like to be a purveyor of people, and I like to observe patterns in culture and the ways that thought arises in public discourse. And sometimes that filters into my inner landscape, and other times it doesn't. And so when I'm writing, particularly when I'm doing fiction writing, I try to hold in tension what it is I'm trying to say with my voice, but also bring into the conversation the varied attitudes, perspectives, streams of thoughts that might be maybe foreign to my own, but that I have been observing either in my friendships, my relationships, either just, seeing on social media, reading sometimes brings me into different worlds and different landscapes. And so I try to be open to the noise of my inner world, if that makes sense, and do my best to communicate the variety of experiences that I feel like need to come out and come up, particularly in my fiction writing. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. I have a follow-up question for that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, in drawing upon, I guess, what you experience externally, all the stimulation out there, are you able to draw upon what's uncomfortable as it comes in, or how do you deal with noise that might not necessarily be comfortable to hear?
That one is one that I'm still learning and figuring out. I should mention that I really got serious about fiction writing around this time last year when Toni Morrison crossed over to join the Ancestors, and I did a lot of um, watching old footage of her talking about what she was doing with her writing and who she was privileging and what it was for. And I remember there was one in particular where I don't know if it was the interviewer or or what, if it was Toni Morrison just talking about it herself, but there was something about like the person asking her, why doesn't she have more mainstream characters, meaning white characters? And, Toni Morrison was very clear about writing beyond the white gaze. Like, this is my voice, this is my experience, and this is what I'm going to write about. And so in studying her and spending time thinking through how formative her writing has been in my evolution as womanist, in my evolution as preacher, in my evolution as everything that I am, I have thought about what does it mean to resist damaging voices, but also be willing to engage with how those damaging voices might actually interplay within the world that I'm seeking to build in my writing. And so sometimes it's uncomfortable, if I'm thinking about, I'm just going to give an example. Like, if I'm thinking about how am I going to talk through this character's reckoning with white supremacy, or this character's reckoning with internalized self-hatred or whatever. Sometimes it's hard because it means that I have to face up to the ways that I've done that or have caused harm to others in doing that. But I think it's necessary for the writing, for at least for my writing style, to do that in ways that I feel like are generative and spark thought and cause people to think about how they might be interacting with these outer voices that are uncomfortable,
Thank you for doing that work, for engaging in that. From what I've read from you, it's been very helpful and insightful. So our second question, when you have identified your voice as your own, what comes up upon that recognition? Is there a conflict that arises internally between what you feel comfortable saying and what is true?
I think yes. So I name that yes, there is a discomfort that comes, or a conflict that arises when I sometimes experience my own voice or even new thought around something that, maybe I hadn't put much thought to. I think a lot about, in my writing, I tend to deal a lot with spirituality because it's so important to who I am as a person. And I think many Black women really, we explore spirituality in ways that can be challenging for the status quo or tradition. And so here lately, I've been experiencing the hesitation to speak on, theologies or beliefs or ways that we were doing church that were harmful, because I know, quite frankly, that some of those beliefs still are sustaining my 90-year-old grandma, or my mom for that matter. Some of those beliefs are things that have kept people sane, kept people from losing it, kept people from, I don't even know what. And so I've been challenged sometimes to speak more frankly about the things that I'm discovering in my own spiritual journey around beliefs that I'm leaving behind, because I want to be a good steward of folks who are in my circle. At the end of the day, like, the Bible says, and all you're getting, get an understanding. Before I left to go to divinity school, I promised myself that at the end of the day, whatever happened, that I would always be mindful of the church mothers, of my Sunday school teachers, of the deacons and deaconesses who were always supportive of me and always wanted me to go forth and prosper. In that same way, like I don't want to have my voice be the thing that shatters something about their faith. You know what I'm saying? And so I've found that there are times when it's not that I'm not telling the truth, it's that I'm being wise with how I share what I share.
Ooh, that has my wheels turning. Do you feel like having those people in the forefront of your mind, I guess who really prayed you through, having those people in their hearts, their thoughts, in the forefront of your mind, do you feel like you do that, or having consideration of them, do you feel like you do so at the expense of yourself? Do you feel like there's ever a moment where you feel compromised? And if so, what is the process that you go through to reckon with that?
Ooh, so you going there, sis. Okay. Do I ever feel compromised? Sure. I think everybody feels compromised in their day-to-day life, you know, around, we're always making approximations around how we show up, who we can show up as, and who we can show up with in our fullness. And so I think there's always a compromise to a certain degree. I don't want to make it seem like we should always just be compromising who we are. That's not what I'm saying. So let me be careful. Let me be careful with what I'm saying. When I was ordained into ministry, you know, there was a reconciling of the weight of this mantle of, you know, being a sharer of the gospel, but also being a carer of people. And in that kind of charge, or in that covenant that I signed, I felt as though there would be times where I had to be willing to make a sacrifice. And I say that carefully because there's too many ways that Black women are always sacrificing, right? And always, you know, just always asking to sacrifice things. And that's not what I want to do. But I feel like there's a balance. I feel like the compromise is balanced out by the relationships that you gain with people. And so if there are ways that I'm starting to feel silenced by my need to protect, or silenced because I'm trying to be careful of those who are in my sphere, that hopefully I'm able to be brought into a type of relationship with them that then allows me to either not have to compromise as much, or at least be honest with those people in due time and in the way that feels the most right for not only me, but also the people that I'm thinking of.
Thank you. So our next question, I feel like you kind of already hinted on it, but I guess, so the question is what is true always necessary to say or write publicly? And how does one go about discerning if it's necessary to say or write publicly? And so you've already talked about that, but I guess the way I'm thinking of truth, we're constructing truth in a different way now.
Okay.
And so I guess truth in this context, what would it be? So if there's something, I guess I'll use the language of conviction. If you feel convicted about something, and I don't know, we both came from the school of the prophets, you know, sometimes things come up to say. I'm just curious, is there a process that you go through when you know you have to say something? And how you if you, I guess, struggling with how you package it, if it doesn't need to be packaged. One of my friends said the other day, sometimes we can do the least harm, but sometimes you end up having to harm. And I don't mean it like I don't think she meant it in a malicious way at all.
Right.
But sometimes things have to be said in order for people to move, or I don't know, for whatever to take place what needs to take place. And I don't think that it's our call to say, well, I'm trying to harm somebody. But I think that when you're called to say something, you just have to say it, and then and what happens after you say it is what happens, to an extent. But I'm curious how you would discern that process for you.
Yeah, it actually matters for me, particularly in writing, the form. If I'm writing fiction, which I tend to lean in the speculative fiction, kind of fantasy kind of lane, maybe think Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, it's almost easier because I tend to look at that kind of writing as a prism or a kaleidoscope. I want people typically in my writing to see truth as a thing that you can turn over and look at in a whole bunch of different ways. And so it's not as difficult for me to think about saying that, and because it's will it cause harm? I don't know that it will cause harm, but it will cause you to pause. And that is actually my intent with speculative fiction. When it comes to writing more like my think pieces or even sermons where I feel prophetic, like you said, the process, it's different. Sometimes there are things that just keep me up at night and I know that I have to say something. Other times it's when I sit down to start writing, I know that I want to talk about a thing, but I don't actually know what's going to come out. I'll be honest and name that. As a writer, sometimes I'm finding my voice as I write it. I think back to a conversation that I had with my grandmother not too long ago. It was right when the George Floyd uprisings happened and Breonna Taylor uprisings were happening. And she clearly lived through a different time of white supremacy, being 90 years old, living in Greenwood, Mississippi, and being a part of the civil rights movement. She was like, I told her that I would get so frustrated because I felt like people didn't want to listen, particularly white people didn't want to listen. I was all in my feelings that day, but she was so eloquent in just saying, don't be upset. The truth is going to do the upsetting for you. So just say what you have to say. That's something that I'm going to take with me for the rest of my life, particularly as it relates to writing or preaching or proclaiming, that like truth is going to do what it's going to do. You only have the responsibility to speak it when you feel led to do so.
So I think that she articulated better than I tried to articulate it. I just had a follow-up question. I promise I did.
Come on with it. I'm ready for it.
Okay, it's about consent because I'm always concerned about consent. Is there space for consent? Because I know that we have a responsibility. We just dance around that whole like having a responsibility thing. But do you think that there is space for consent, especially considering that a lot of times doing this work is not safe?
Let's tease out what you mean consent in what way. I want to make sure I'm understanding.
Consent in actually going forth and I guess doing the act of proclamation or writing or sharing or whatever it is, is there space for consent? And I'm curious about that because I think sometimes I feel burdened in some ways. And then if I don't do something, I feel guilty, but I'm not really sure if I feel guilty because I should feel guilty for real, or if I feel guilty just because that's something that I made up, you know.
That's a good one. I think consent, and you and I talked about this a little bit before we got on here, went live, but like there's a part of consent that the onus is on me, the person, to give myself, to take up space, to speak my truth, to take responsibility for what that truth might mean to others. I think there are other forms of consent that need to be taken into account, particularly because I like to write. Also, I like to write personal narrative and things like that in my essays that I like to write. Sometimes other people are implicated when you're speaking your truth, and they might not want you telling all the business from your perspective. And that's something that we really do. I think we've got to do a better job of wrestling with, given the ways that I guess technology or just the age and time that we're living in. Anybody can be a author and put up their own website and blog and write all the things right now. But there's something about the ethics of it that, you know, gets kind of lost in the mix in some of these conversations and think pieces that people are writing. So I definitely think there's room to talk about consent in much more intentional ways than we are. It begins first with me, the person, and then it needs to evolve to include others who might be implicated in what I'm writing. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's how I interpreted it. Do we need to keep going down this train of thought?
That was helpful. It certainly helped me. But now that you said ethics, I'm curious. So, how would you describe your code of ethics when it comes to, I guess, that particular context? You know, when people are implicated, or
Mm-hmm. I will be honest and say I am a perpetually conflicted prophet, if there ever was one, because I am conflict avoidant. I don't like to cause a rub through personal attack. Personal attack is not really actually the way that I want to look at it, but I would rather talk about a thing, a concept, a thinking, or a consequence of something that happened rather than talk about the personal. I like to think of things in root causes or maybe like the systemic implications of things, but I don't like to assign things to people, at least not publicly. That's not my ministry. Now, there are some people who are very good at that, who are really masterful at naming a thing or a person or a person's actions as problematic while giving them room to be completely human and whole or whatever they are. My ethics is be a disruptor, speak the truth, but also be very pastoral. My first nature is going to always be pastoral. I tend to be overly diplomatic, which can be problematic sometimes because I do think right now, this moment in history, you have to pick a side. Pick a side, that may not be the best word. Diplomacy can be the enemy of showing up rightly in this moment. And so I'm very careful on how I engage publicly around matters of injustice, because I want to be mindful to always just be true to who Shantell is. It's really easy to get out here in the public sphere and be, typing, thugging, doing all the things that really aren't you. And that's not, I don't want to do that. I want to be able to speak. I think it was Walter Brueggemann that said, be able to critique the systems or criticize the systems and energize the people. Like that's how I look at how I want to take up space in this lane.
I have one more follow-up question, I think.
Okay.
So in saying that, who would you say that your intended audience is? Does it change? Is it the same?
It changes. I like to think that I'm writing to the other Chantells of the world who, grew up maybe painfully evangelical sometimes, but are all the better for it, who, maybe struggle to make sense of their identity in their younger years, but in their latter years are coming into the fullness of who they are as a person, as a Black woman, as whatever their particularity is. Um, I will be honest and say I have been kind of tickled that a lot of white people read my stuff. And it's funny to me always because it's fine, like it's out there, it's in public. I welcome you to read it, but I'm writing it for Black women. Like it says on my website, I curate worlds for Black women. But I own the ways that I have grown up, and I own even some of the privileges that I've had, and I understand why there may be why sometimes white people are drawn to some of my work, I guess. And so, yeah, my audience are people like me, who are just like everyday Black women who just have questions, who are curious, who want to think about things and not necessarily fight about them. Like I don't have to fight about stuff. I just want to let's talk about it. Like let's think about it. What does that mean? Well, I wonder why they did that. Like that's the type of person that I think that I'm writing to. But I would actually be curious to have you answer who you think it is. You've read some of my stuff and I've read some of yours. And so I would be curious who you think my audience is. And I want to know who your audience is.
I mean, I'd be like, she writing to me, like she's reading me, like I feel read, not for filth, but for edification.
Yeah.
So I would definitely say that people who are like me, I mean, I can't speak for other Black women, but it definitely feels like I am being spoken to and handled with care. So I can't remember what the name of the piece is. I think it was something about, it was about misogyny and misogyny hating Black women. Like
Yeah.
I felt held, and I usually don't use that metaphor, but I really felt held, and I think I needed to be held, and I didn't know I needed to be held when I read it. So thank you for that.
And I often feel the same after I read your stuff. I feel like, man, sis came through with the win today. So I ditto those remarks.
I'm so glad you feel that way. Who am I writing to though? I think first and foremost, I'm writing to me. Yeah, we talked about this beforehand, but yeah, I'm writing to me. And whenever I need a balm, as I said before before we went live, if I need a balm, then I write in hopes that balm will, I guess, show up in whatever whatever's shown up on the page. Yeah. And then I try to share it with whoever might need it. Usually, I mean, not usually, lately I've been using us and we, and I guess us and we implies a certain kind of body. And so I would say, as of late, extended for myself, it would be Black bodies. But when I don't feel affirmed, when I don't feel like taking up space is something that is in my best interest, yeah, I'm hoping that somebody else who might feel the same way is encouraged to take up space. And even if that's not even an option, just to be comforted in knowing that somebody else is having that same struggle. So, because oftentimes I feel disconnected and isolated in my struggle. But when I read something that I was like, oh, I feel articulated, like that reconnection happens. And so that's what I experienced in your writing. So I'm hoping that other people can feel reconnected when they read my stuff, particularly Black bodies.
Absolutely. I affirm that you doing all that and some. So
thank you. I'm not good at receiving affirmation as much as I need it, but I'm gonna sit with it.
Yes.
I'm gonna sit with
Same.
it. So the last question I had written down was, what are the risks of not disclosing truth? But instead of truth, I'm going to switch it up to say taking up space, because we've been talking a lot about space. And so, because I feel like we've already dealt with like the risks or whatever, what would you say the risks are of not taking up space with you, your voice, your writing?
Yeah, there was a quote that I read, and I really wish I knew who said it. It may be Maya Angelou, but I could be completely wrong. But it was like, essentially, like, who are you to deprive the world of you? You know, who are you to deprive the world of your gifts? Um, and I do think we run the risk of freedom. We run the risk of, I'm sorry, not obtaining freedom, not obtaining liberation, not not reaching people where we are by not taking up space. I've been doing some reading and some researching on Ella Baker, and I really appreciate some of the philosophy that she carried with her as an organizer, but just as a person, just as a human. You know, she had this embodiment that, like, Black folks in particular didn't need a Black leader. Like, Black folks had the answer. Black folks literally are the answer if we could just work together and be empowered. And I think that that's really an integral part of why we should take up space. Like, we don't have to have another figurehead like Martin Luther King or Barack Obama or whatever. I mean, even though I will say I am excited to have Kamala Harris be on the ticket for vice president. That's wonderful, and that has its room and its space. But, like, we can be revolutionary where we are if we would just bet on ourselves and take the risk to go into this beautiful struggle of taking up space. That's how I see that.
Well, I thank you for betting on yourself and taking up the space that you have. So I'm appreciative, and I'm sure that everyone who has interacted with you, who has interacted with your work, is appreciative as well, because I just couldn't see how they wouldn't be. So thank you. And thank you so much for being here with us, for allowing us to hear your heart. And I guess it's now time. Let's see if we have any comments, any questions. Let's see. I gotta find the video since we're on Zoom. I don't think that let's see. I don't think we had any comments. All right, so if we don't have any comments, we'll go ahead and conclude, we'll end. And let's see, can you tell us about where we can find you, or anything else related to your work that you'd like to share?
Yeah, you can find me on social media, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, though I don't be knowing how to use the Twitter, so I'm still learning. But everything is at Shantell H. Hill. And my website is the same, www.shantellhhill.com. And there I'm writing just kind of all kinds of stuff right now. Like I said, I've been spending a lot of intentional time writing fiction, so it's giving me a little bit less time to write my think pieces as much. But hopefully there'll be some exciting things coming from me very, very soon in the way of fiction writing. So yeah, you can find me at www.shantellhhill.com.
All right, thank you so much. Let's see. Thank you for participating in this discussion, all of you that tuned in at home. If you know someone who you think needs to hear what we've talked about, Please don't hesitate to hit that share button. And also don't forget to like and follow our page, Musings from the Lighthouse. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, and I don't know how to use Twitter either, but we're on there. And all the handles are the same. And also our blog is there as well. So it's musingsfromthelighthouse.wordpress.com. I actually wrote or submitted a new blog this morning, so that's out there. And also, I think that's it. Yeah, we'll be back next week. So thank you for being here with us.